What's good? Welcome to the MAZIST, where mythos meets method and methods solve mysteries. I'm your host, Christopher, and today I want to talk about the importance of a creative ecosystem. And I'm going to talk about it specifically within my own practice, and then talk about a slight example of the philosophy I've adopted for my own ecosystem. So specifically, I'm going to break down these points. What is a creative ecosystem? Why you should care about that in your own practice. And I'm going to talk about the techniques I go to in my own work. And then a specific example of this ecosystem in what I like to call the wizardry method. And I'll break that down more later. But first, what is a creative ecosystem? And my own definition is a creative ecosystem is a system where the craft, research, and study around one's artistic practice is sustainable and consistent towards one's goals. Right? And I think the first step in this breakdown is to really get down what is your goal? What are the goals that you're going towards in your ecosystem? What is the bigger picture? And for me, it's a career where I am living off of my art and able to spread my art and my ideas to a consistent cycle of projects, campaigns, and conversations where the ideas have their own system of expression. And you can see that larger vision by the end of my career. I want to be able to showcase a whole world, a whole universe by the end of my career, and have people, really break down the aspects of that world, the aspects of that philosophy that I've adopted in my art, and use it for their own work. I want to be able to be an inspiration for others, and I think that goal has a particular ecosystem. Every goal that you have in your art has a particular ecosystem where each of these things, craft, research, and study, impact or inform those parts of your process or of your practice. So, breaking it down further, we have the craft, right? And I think craft really comes down to how frequently are you practicing your craft, and then what is the quality of that practice, right? And I think in an ideal ecosystem, for me at least, the craft is really something that is done every day, for at least an hour, at least an hour, if not, two or three. But ideally, I think at the end of the day, it's really up to the artist where you stand on what you do with your craft and the quality of the craft that you do. It's really all about what you believe you can do. I feel like everyone's potential is kind of up for grabs in that sense. And I feel like that's so important to realize, that you really only get what you put in. And once you realize that, like really get that in your mind, I feel like the art becomes seamless to a certain extent. But I'll go into that a little bit more later. But the next part is the research, right? And there's quantitative and qualitative research. The quantitative is measuring numbers, statistics, analytics, concrete items having to do with your particular craft, concrete measurements. And then qualitative research is exploring ideas and experiences surrounding the creation of your work. And I think, again, it goes along with craft, right? Research is only as effective as you make it, right? You get what you put in. And expanding from what I said in my world building video, you can see that after this one, The depth of one's research can be felt in the final work almost always, but it is often indirect, right? No one ever really cares about what research went into a rap album or what cultural significances. I don't know if that's a word. No one usually cares about what went into the research behind a project, but it's always felt. You know what I mean? You can tell there's a depth, there's an authenticity to um, the work when research is done well. I think right research, the concept of right, research is kind of a quagmire in and of itself, a problem in and of itself. But um, I think there's no right or wrong way to do it, honestly, as long as you are honest in your learning process and you record everything that you learn. And I think integrity with the research process is another thing that is very important and that can always be seen or felt in the final work. As indirect as it is felt, you know? And that's just so interesting to me. And I think there's this idea from Virgil Abloh, from his lecture series. I'm really paraphrasing here, but the thing about design is that it's implied. Good design is hardly noticeable to the average end user. I don't know if he said that exact thing, but to that point, Virgil Abloh was always saying that like a door handle, right? No one notices a door handle, but we use it every day and it's seamless in its usage. You know what I mean? That's good design, right? But I think when you design your projects, when you design your work, going from a good idea in your research and applying that to the design of your work, I think it should be implied. It should be hidden. It should be barely noticeable, if at all, because I think that like the depth being felt is always more resonant than the depth being in your face. And I'm still working on that in my own practice. I think I have a ways to go before my design is ever, unnoticeable. But that's just my own, critique of myself. And, we are all our hardest critiques. So that's just the process. But the next part is the study. And so where research deals with the substance of the artist's craft, the study is where the creative deepens the understanding of the larger world their work exists within. And I think these concepts right here are the core of study: context, inspiration, influence, and lineage. Now, what do I mean by that? So when we study, we are often looking for the context our work is going to exist within. What is the game? What does the game dictate that art looks like now? What does the competition say a rap song should sound like right now? How do we deviate from that? How do we adhere to that? And the way you adhere or deviate is always informed by your inspirations, your competition, your context. You know what I'm saying? Your influences. And then lineage is sort of what is the conversation what is the conversation your art is trying to be a part of or contribute to. There's always a conversation with art. There's always a dialogue happening between art and society, and with society and art and the artists. What lineage of art does your work involve itself within? And I'm still trying to figure that on my own myself. But I think for me, in terms of hip hop, I would consider myself in the same lineage as, I would say, a Tyler the Creator, an ASAP Rocky. I would say Wu-Tang Clan, specifically GZA. I would say MF Doom. I would say Earl Sweatshirt. I would say Del the Funky Homo Sapien. Those are all people like Deltron 3030. shoot, I was just talking about that the other day with a couple of my friends. But yeah, like that nigga was crazy, bro. And he just has these really dope lyrics and concepts that he used in his work, specifically in Deltron 3030. That was like a very formative piece of art to me. But I would say a Kai solo, that's a very deep pull from the current underground. But I think he's another just amazing artist that I feel like I definitely add to the conversation that he's a part of. And really the ecosystem, the purpose of the ecosystem, to bring it back, it provides life to the separate parts within one's process, right? Each part of this trifecta, craft, study, research, they're meant to inform the momentum one's process undergoes as we complete projects, right? Um, Sometimes we fall behind, sometimes we procrastinate, doubt a certain part of the process or system. And that's usually in the craft, right? But we seldom, that was weird. But we seldom pay attention to the other parts of the process we're doing well in, or maybe neglecting. And I think active presence within the system is vital to remain steadfast in the operation, right? It's not and I really think like active presence is not about doing everything at 100%, right? But allowing each part of the ecosystem to take up shifting proportions of the full 100%, right? Instead of each part taking 100%, research is at 50, craft is at 35, study is at 15. And you can shift those portions as you need to, depending on where you are in your process, right? So to bring it to the MAZIST ecosystem, what I do, I would say that study takes up a pretty large portion of the operations most of the time. And that comes from me understanding that I kind of started my artistic practice from a deep love of the artists working during my era. I loved ASAP Rocky. I loved MF Doom. I loved Earl Sweatshirt. I loved Kendrick Lamar. And I understand that like a crucial part of my ecosystem's life is seeing the larger world move in its fashions and patterns. I learn from that, watching the bigger kids. You feel me? And that is just so important to me, is being hip, and then with the hop. You feel me? Hip hop. I don't know, whatever. But I would say craft probably takes up the next largest section. And I kind of realized late in my journey that not actively creating and practicing my craft led to a lot of my frustrations with the game of it all. I think that like when we don't practice, we look to others doing their work as a reminder of what we're not doing. And that tends to lead to, jealousy, envy, bitterness. And I've since, matured from that mindset now that I'm actually, doing this shit, and I think that's so important. Like if you just focus on yourself, you'll get there eventually. You know what I mean? Like if you focus on bettering yourself and not looking at the next man, you'll get there. And the next man's going to look at you. You know what I mean? Like there's always two sides to a story, bro. You never know who's watching. You might always be watching, but you never know who's watching you, bro. You never know. And that shit's crazy to me. And so, for me in craft, my projects are blueprints for the ecosystem, shifting with each evolution. And the driving force behind my craft is evolution, right? And seeing my projects as the manifestation of this evolved Christopher, I understood my task for each project, and that is to switch the blueprints. That's kind of the thing I like to say. Like every project, I switch the blueprints. The DNA of my creative process can't stay stagnant, or else I will get bored. I will get bored and complacent. And the moment I feel paralysis within my process, this is just another, metaphor. I know that a gear that's already within the blueprint needs lubrication or needs to be replaced, you know? It's the awareness of the blueprint that even allows me to shift towards the optimal movement, you know? Realizing it's both living and a mechanism within my work allows me to work with it, you know? It's a device, you know? You troubleshoot, you know, then um, you complete a project or you do a song and you realize the errors and then you adjust, you know, you evolve. And with each project completed, I have a growing archive of demos, drafts, notes, and footage that informs the evolution of the process, the ecosystem, right? And research is, you know, something I'm getting better at with each year. I do this shit. And it's really a matter of maturity with the production of my work, right? I realized, excuse me, I realized that there were gaps, there were steps I was missing in my process that created these like large gaps with each session focused on craft, right? Every time I wasn't learning, every time I wasn't actively learning or reading or studying or listening, I felt like there was always a missing link between me and the next project or me and the next song or the next piece I had to write, you know? Learning is the fuel to the ecosystem's operation, no matter what you do, you know? If you're not learning, you're not moving forward, you know? Like learning is crucial. And now I'm going to talk about some techniques. Reading for fuel, not just inspo. You can't always be pining for inspiration. Sometimes you just got to do the thing. You just got to do the do, you know? And reading is fuel for the ideas going in your mind, and uh for the operation you're doing, you know? Reading is where you collapse the distance between you and what's already been, you know, and you learn the connections that are possible within your own craft by learning what's already been, you know. Another technique, movement during study, reinforcing experience. Like for me, it's like walking. Walking for me is so important, and walking while I'm listening to a project that I'm inspired by or listening to an artist that I'm learning from, that is literally the bread and butter of how I like create learning experiences for myself and create new connections and shit. And that is it's been such a blessing to be able to move my body the way I have lately and learn while I do so. Yeah, it's just really dope how it all works out, you know, how it all comes together, how you learn, how ideas come to the mind in the most inopportune but also opportune times, you know. It's never static. It's always flowing. You know, it's abundant. Realizing that abundance is crazy, you know. But the next part is embodiment, visualization, you know. We always talk about in the manifestation community on YouTube and stuff that like you have to embody the person that you want to become. You have to embody the you that has achieved the things you want to achieve. Then your mind will lead you subconsciously to those places because you've seen it in your mind and you've embodied it in emotion, you know? And this particular method, thematic embodiment, is something I'm going to talk about now with the wizardry method. Now, the core of this method is alignment with the identity behind your process, right? So for me, I believe my artwork is a practice of arcana. Now, to ground that, I believe that arcana is the force of change within reality, within society, within the individual. It's this force that is active within my creative philosophy, but also the world. right? It grounds me in the system that I want to uh, use in my process, right? And a wizard, to me, is someone who studies this arcane, this arcana, and practices their own unique knowledge derived magic, right? And deeper and more importantly, my inner child always wanted to be a wizard, you know what I mean? Like, I've always wanted to be a magic ass nigga, you know what I'm saying? Like, I legitimately asked my parents if I could go to this, like, internet program back in, like, 2000, like, 2011 to literally study magic at a point in my childhood. Like, I was really about that shit. Like, I wanted to be all in on the magic stuff, the mystic arts. But now, like, the practice of being a wizard has to be grounded in the factors that actually produce change in the world, in my own life, you know? And in my work, I do that through hip hop, philosophy, mythology, you know, etc. And thematic embodiment without a real life practice to ground its themes is just imaginary playtime. Like, it's useless, you know? Or it could become, you know, something like psychosis, you know? And that it did become psychosis for me at multiple points in my life. And so the practice, right, the process that you develop with research, study, craft, it materializes the embodiment within the work you produce. Now, what does that mean, right? My wizard theme is an active element in my work. Like, damn near every character in my work can do magic. And the mechanics of the world I'm creating is similar to a lot of myths and a lot of sci-fi and fantasy. And my embodiment of this theme allows me to tap into these concepts with a more vivid perspective, right? It's a lot more authentic to who I am as a person because I really think I'm with this magic shit. You know what I'm saying? To a certain extent, you know, practice discernment with what I'm saying here, right? And where I'm trying to go with it, right? Eventually, I'll have a whole persona with this art shit, right? Going so far as to wear like a super suit or like a futuristic wizard garb as like my main like fit, my outfit. You feel me? Like, I'm talking along the lines of like a Steve Jobs wearing a turtleneck or like Rick Owens with all his black fits. You feel me? Like, I really want to live like the wizard I know I am, you know? And that's, you know, call that what you will, but that's a thematic embodiment. That's how far thematic embodiment can potentially go. It can potentially build your world building, you know? Build your brand even. You know what I'm saying? So, to summarize, right? Find what makes up the ecosystem to your art. It could be the three things I just talked about, you know, craft, research, study, but I am not an expert. You know, I'm simply another artist sharing what I've learned, right? But I think a key to this discussion is being active in learning yourself and your process and using the ideas that stick with you as anchors in your evolution. You feel me? In my practice, it looks like intentional study of what I love and learn from, experimental craft with the blueprint philosophy behind my projects, and this radical embodiment that builds around the themes and aesthetic of my art. You feel me? But yeah, that's really all I had to say about that. I've kind of been talking for a long time. But if you like this video and you want to see more, please leave a like, a comment, and subscribe. I am a very small channel and rely on word of mouth. So, you know, don't be afraid to share with others who may get something out of this video, you know. I would love to talk with you more, you know. And if you're interested in reading some of my work or listening to my work, all of my links are in the description box below. And the MAZIST verse, the Mazism verse, is growing in real time, y'all. You feel me? And I'm excited to show y'all the next piece in the canon. It's coming up very soon. Mando Files. If you know, you know. But for now, peace. Maze out.